Great. Hi, everybody. Full Zoom room tonight. Just bear with me while I admit you all. Lovely. Everybody seems to be in now, so let's get started. So, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's launch of Jaya Savage's Change Machine. I'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm currently broadcasting to you from, the Yagara and Turrbal people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Before I hand you over to our speakers this evening, I'd first like to reiterate some of the information that I mentioned in the email you were sent earlier with the link to tonight's event. So because we are a very large group this evening, which is wonderful, you have all been placed on mute and you'll remain so throughout the evening, right up until the end when I take you off so that you can join me in thanking all of our speakers tonight. However, that doesn't mean that we won't be having a Q&A session. We will. It will just look a little bit different to how you might expect. So you can send your questions to me using the chat box. If you can't see it right now, you will be able to access it if you look in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. I'll be sending you a link there shortly, so it should pop up. Type your question in there, it will come directly to me. And then when I'm prompted to read them out later in the evening, I'll do so along with your name. So start thinking of them and sending them through to me when you can. So the other thing that I'd like to mention this evening before we begin is that we have a special promotion on at the moment for everybody who is attending our event tonight. If you use the code EVENT at checkout on our website when making a purchase, you'll receive 10% off all purchases store-wide. So as I said, I'll be posting the link to purchase your copy of Change Machine in the chat box shortly. So I recommend that you get in quick because this is for the next 24 hours only. So that's enough from me. I would now like to introduce Jaya Savige. Jaya was born in Sydney, raised on Bribie Island, grew up on Boundary Street, and lives in London, from where he is joining us and where it is 10:30 in the morning at the moment. Jaya has lived abroad since 2009 when he received a Gates Cambridge scholarship to read for a PhD on James Joyce at the University of Cambridge, Christ's College. Since 2013, he has lectured in English literature and creative writing at the New College of the Humanities in Bloomsbury, a block from the British Museum, where he founded the creative writing degree. His first collection, Latecomers, published with UQP in 2005, when he was 26, won the New South Wales Premier's Kenneth Slessor Prize for Poetry, the Thomas Shapcott Poetry Prize, and was shortlisted for a number of other awards, while Surface to Air, also published with UQP in 2011, was shortlisted for the Age Poetry Book of the Year and the Western Australian Premier's Award for Poetry. You can find Jaya's poems in such international publications as the Poetry Review, the London Magazine, Poetry Chicago, the Kenyon Review, and Poesia, Italy. In magazines and journals at home, including this month's Griffith Review, and in such anthologies as the Penguin Anthology of Australian Poetry, Contemporary Australian Poetry, and 30 Australian Poets. He is the long-standing poetry editor for The Weekend Australian. He is the recipient of travelling fellowships from the Martin Bequest and Brisbane Lord Mayor, and Australia Council residencies at the BR Whiting Studio, Rome, and at the Cité Internationale des Arts, Paris. Our first speaker for tonight, however, is Aviva Tufffield. Aviva is a publisher at the University of Queensland Press and was a co-founder and the inaugural executive director of the Stella Prize. So Aviva, I will now hand over to you to begin the evening.
Thank you, Emma Kate, and thank you everyone who is on Zoom. Firstly, I too would like to acknowledge that I'm Zooming from the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present all around this continent, and to recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. I'd also like to thank Avid Reader for hosting this launch and for all that they do to support authors, publishers, and the literary community. I'm delighted to be part of this virtual launch of Jaya Savage's superb new poetry collection, Change Machine. UQP are the proud publishers of Jaya's first two collections, Latecomers and Surface to Air, and I know that this third book is going to cement his reputation both here and overseas as one of Australia's finest living poets. Change Machine is a culmination of almost 10 years' work, and it's definitely been worth the wait. These poems are clever and adventurous, poignant and ironic. Some are personal, such as Bark Fuchsia, which begins with a new father out walking with his newborn. Many are intellectually playful, such as Her Late Hand, split across the page as it riffs on the signifier for handwriting. And all are finely tuned to the absurdities of life, history, and language. There is a wry wit that frequently raises a smile. And let it not be forgotten that Jaya is the emperor of the anagram, and his empire is vast. There is so much to admire and to enjoy in Change Machine. Congratulations, Jaya, on this masterful collection. We look forward to seeing all the praise it is going to garner. I would now like to introduce Lisa Gorton, who has kindly agreed to officially launch Change Machine here tonight. But before I do, I just want to pay tribute to her meticulous editorial work with Jaya in developing his manuscript into this superb book. Lisa Gorton has a PhD on the poetry of John Donne from the University of Oxford. She is a poet and novelist, essayist, and reviewer. Her first poetry collection, Press Release, won the Victorian Premier's Award for Poetry. Her second, Hotel Hyperion, was awarded the Philip Hodgins Memorial Medal. And her third, Empirical, was shortlisted for the New South Wales Premier's Award for Poetry. Her novel, The Life of Houses, was the co-winner of the 2016 Prime Minister's Award for Fiction. Lisa is a good friend and a wonderful, wonderful writer. So here, over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Aviva. And congratulations, Jaya. I'm speaking on Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung country, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. It's been to me a privilege to spend a lot of time with this book. Each time I read it, this book catches me up again. When I say that, it sounds like a small thing, maybe, but to me, this way of always renewing interest is the defining characteristic of a great book. Every part of it's been shaped by a distinctive vision. That only happens, I think, when a writer has had something at stake. Jaya spent almost 10 years on this book, and he asked a lot of it. For it to hold together without amalgamating childhood and adulthood here and there, different sides of the world. Jaya has realized this here with an admirably stubborn insistence on its all being separately true in the same kind of way at the same time. Grey skies and stonewashed jeans, voices and sausages, stars and a soda pour, sporks. Some poets have written about poetry as binary code, as language switching on and off, self-generating and self-replacing. Jaya's book, on the other hand, gives me the sense of some complicated piece of machinery made of hooks and interlocking wheels, of many parts working against and with each other ingeniously, a machine powered by tension between centrifugal and centripetal forces. It is everywhere intricate and involving and under pressure and in motion. It doesn't want one thing to replace another. It doesn't want differences reconciled. It wants to test how far its machine can hold different and sometimes contradictory truths and registers together, being here and there and on this side and that side of time at the same time. Wallace Stevens once said that the aim in form is to be free in whatever form is used. In these forms, Jaya invents formal constraints. He makes the poem itself into a change machine. What Jaya's forms generate out of such constraint is a veering imaginative freedom. Change machine has this defiant sprezzatura. It's findable everywhere. One example is Jaya's use of anagram rhymes. In these, in the end word or phrase of each line, he doesn't ring the same sound. Instead, he makes a new word or phrase out of its same letters: credo, decor, coda. Here's the mind asking its language, or maybe language asking its mind, to make itself within its limits into a machine of invention. I think of Change Machine as a kind of pressure test of the language machine. In it, Jaya is forcing years and modes and places and poetic registers together. He's asking that poetry work not as an art of consolation, but as a means of taking hold of multitudinous contradictory things at the same time, in the same terms. not decor, but credo. It's a remarkable book. It's worth the years he's given it. It's been such a pleasure to work with it over a long time, with all its incredible, intelligent flair and freedom. And now it's launched and finished and at its beginning in the world. Congratulations, Jaya. It's a cracker. Did I say that?
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much for those wonderfully kind words. And thank you to Aviva and UQP and to Lisa, to all of you for working so hard on this book, for teaching me again, you know, what this process is like, and how much of a learning process it is in many ways. You keep learning anew, and I've learned so much from both of you, and as well from others at UQP. So thank you all. Thank you also to Avid Reader Bookstore. Those of you who know me from when I was young know that I grew up in that vicinity during my uni days, my undergraduate days. I worked at, I think, as a waiter at 4 or 5 different restaurants and establishments on Boundary Street. So I remember when Avid Reader arrived in '97, actually, and it's an honor to be launching this book virtually there back at Boundary Street. And thank you also to everybody who has joined in. I don't have all of your names in front of me, but I can see some of you. I'm so honored and grateful that you've joined in your evening if you're in Australia, in your morning if you're over here in the UK, and maybe 1 or 2 people elsewhere also at different times of the day. So thank you very much. Yes, it has been a while since my last book, that's right, and I have been over here for quite some time. That was never a plan. Neither of those 2 things were a plan. It's just the way that it's worked out. Moving as a poet overseas, moving overseas, I think is, you know, it's this double-edged sword, isn't it? You get, there's excitement and there's sort of a newness, but when you leave your sort of root systems behind, there's also this sort of void and vacancy that can be there over time. And so there's this tension between those things. And I think as a poet, maybe you're also encountering differences in poetic traditions and cultures, especially if you're moving, say, from somewhere like Australia to the UK, with all the complexities of that relationship. It's similar but slightly different cultures in the as part of the Anglosphere, and yeah. So you know, it's not like I plan to wait this long for another book. It's just the way that it's worked out. So thank you to everybody. I'm now going to read a few things from the book, a few of the poems, and to make things interesting, because these poems sort of span such a long time, it occurred to me that whatever poems that I choose, I mean, I'm probably going to choose personal poems to read, the ones that kind of touchstone points that would, you know, signify or that relate to big moments in my life over the last period of time. But then that's the author's prerogative. So to make it interesting, I'm going to try to restrict my reading to 10 or 12 minutes, and then I'm going to invite anybody in the audience who's read the book to request that I read a particular poem by typing in the chat the title of that poem. Now that might sound ambitious or foolhardy given the book's just come out, but I had some wonderful readers of the book in manuscript form, both Aviva and Lisa, to begin with, but also a host of wonderful readers. And I know that 1 or 2 of you have read the book. So if nobody requests, that's fine. But I'll put the option out there. That's partly because I really like requests when I hear readings. I like to hear what people like to hear, if you know what I mean. And so, yeah, I just thought I'd do that for something different. So I'm going to read a few poems now. The first poem I'm going to read is, the book is in 4 parts. And I won't explain what those 4 parts are doing. Maybe I'll touch on that later. But this is a poem from the final part. And I'll just make a brief note here that this word, the first word of the poem, Chimera, chimera, is one that I used to pronounce chimera, actually. And isn't that strange how, you know, sometimes you find out that a word that you used to pronounce one way is totally pronounced another way. But I mention that because, you know, for if you know, just to refresh your memory, that is a hybrid creature from Greek mythology with parts of different animals, usually a lion's head and the tail of a serpent or something like this. So it's a hybrid construction. And I think there may be one or two of you who are actually laboratory scientists in the audience, and you'll also, so I should also mention that it's used in the context of genetics with, you know, genes, DNA from different individuals, so it can be conceived in that way as well. This first word of the poem, I don't want to talk too much about it. Okay, spork. Chimera native to our plastic age. Crossbred ambassador from the planet of blur. Both and not either or. You are glued schism. A threat to the law of non-contradiction. Compromise incarnate. Quisling, turncoat, apostate. The broker risking all for lasting truce. His foolish hopes for peace between the tribes. All the lit pipes that constellate the blear of tearful summitry. The hard-won treaty as an affront to purity. A firm, unequivocal rebuttal of unilateralism. Some rogue warm wishes from a troll farm. A tied state of origin. Raucous applause on the floor of the rent chamber. The kids choosing to share. And yet, the cutlery of choice in war and prisons. Ideal orienteering kit. Humble campfire caboodle. Relief for klutzes with chopsticks. Flower of the food court. Perfectly accurate stabber of the halved apricot. In tune with mashed roots. Adept at tabbouleh, farfalle, paella. Proud Sheila fella. Affable punk sphinx with your mien of scoop and your hairdo of stout cockatoo. Inscrutable statuette of liberty, enemy of monomania, standard bearer for hybrid vigor. Had I need of an heraldic crest, you would form the plume of polypropylene tufting from my helm. For you were always a bit like me, spork, a half-caste gook, an incendiary Spock, beamed in by genetic monsoon and plonked down hard onto a patio on an island in Queensland that gave the most rousing ovation to one nation. A slap in Pop's face who'd fought in the Pacific. Up close physical proof of the peril produced in his own daughter's womb. She wanted to give him the forks, but it wasn't her nature to fight with her father. So she gave him the future. That's probably the closest I get to a poem reflecting on race from a personal perspective in this book, I think, and maybe it's a bit incendiary to start with that one. I don't know. So one of the most important thing, you know, that can happen to someone in becoming a parent, and that's something that happened to me over the period of the last 9 years of this book, and it's kind of mandatory, right, for poets to write about that, or perhaps, and it was in my case anyway. And so I'm going to read the poem I've written for my baby boy Xavier. Bach to the Fuchsia. In thrall to thresholds, drawn to every brink. At 3 weeks old, an infant's eye adores the frames of things, the joinery that holds each smudge in place and individuates. It feasts on edges, architraves and jambs, the skirting boards of portals, vistas, stairs, the sinews of a monochrome Matisse above the couch, a rim of tortoiseshell that clasps a lens, jawlines, bevels, hems. Collecting motley verges, most of all, it relishes the glinting blade of gold that flashes in the gaps between the blinds. A second birth, a scimitar aflame that fattens on each careless ghost of wind, as if it knew the brilliant strip contained some future-proof technology for life. The leavings of a star have cast this spell. summoning blood and chlorophyll. And so, the summer of his birth, I find myself orbiting the block, hammering our bond in the forge of an inhuman heat wave. I emphasize the hip jolt of each step to simulate the rocking of the womb, as if I knew. My crude technique appears to do the trick. That glassy stare, as though he hailed from a pond of jellied frog spawn, his visa from the Commonwealth of Zonk. I am a roving gum, and this koala is my son. His pupils, rowing back toward the main, weary of their cargo, shove off their oars and drift onto a eucalyptus reef, as curbside fuchsias, wilting in a kiln of scorching bitumen, collapse in heaps of silk and taffeta upon the street, like lurid ballerinas on the nod, the victims of a batch of iffy pills. Back home, some Bach to help us both relax. Partita number 2, but on the lute. And as the plucked notes run, I learn to count the cost my gaze extracts, how every glance beseeches him to concentrate on me, the toll it takes to hew a face from scratch and animate the world. He's now 2.5, so, you know, yeah, that was written shortly after he was born. It strikes me now, while I'm still on these personal sorts of poems, that I want to read a poem for the guy who would have been, or who was Xavier's older brother, had he made it. This poem, and I'll take this opportunity to do that, because I don't know how often I'll do that. The poem takes its title from an artwork that was important to my partner and I at the time, by Bill Viola, the video artist. And this artwork is a 6-meter high video installation, simply of a body rising up with water in reverse, and it's very loud. Tristan's Ascension, in memory of Blaze. The supersonic winds of Neptune might thrum like this. 1 billion miles of naught, then whang, the skipping rope at warp speed in your chest, the custom drum kit of a millipede. Drummer boy, we know nothing of equilibrium. But if you catch that air bubble from the gulp of the waiting room's water cooler, you will rise like the drowned in Bill Viola, up through the roof of the sonogram, and join us in the sunroom. Oh son, you stepped off one stop too soon. Your mother has flown all the way to Titan to look for you. She bellows to a mound of electric sand for a sound, one sound, or a way to rewind waterfalls and rain. Yes, we will pick you up again. What I might do there is just very briefly show you this artwork that I was talking about. And we held Blaze, and you know, it's weird because the poem was meant to be about how perfectly gorgeous his foot, the memory of his foot was, but it didn't turn out like that. This is the video artwork there. I'm not sure how long it takes, about, well, forever, 10 minutes or something. But it's quite a remarkable artwork if you want to check that out. Okay. Now, while I'm, I also want to read what in my head is a companion poem to that, which is the poem for his mother, my partner Emma. the other thing that I want to mention about this for Aussies, it's really for people from, I mean, I hesitate to call the New World, definitely that term's problematic, but when you come to a place where there's very old buildings and you move into houses, it's very strange to find that there are these cracks running through many of the buildings. And in fact, people monitor these cracks because they're sort of they're subsiding. And we lived in one of these houses and we had someone to keep monitoring the crack, as it were. Tips for managing subsidence for Emma. One's aptitude for monitoring cracks can be refined. This is something I learned observing the surveyor's calipers. Before he could decline our tea, he'd clued at fault was the insistence of a root, the hawthorn in our quiet neighbour's yard, as if some soil-blind striver, ravenous, were headbutting the floor to thieve our juice. A rule of thumb, he said, let no tree grow taller than its distance from the house. I have news for him. The crack is worse. There, where the black sclerotic vein slithers up the post and along the beam toward the disconnected smoke alarm, it flares into a seam of emptiness so broad it's what the Cornish call a zorn. And one more thing. My wife is rock-rimmed in the chasm. At least that's my best guess. The month we lost our boy, I found her knelt before that cold-arrested lightning in our wall, examining the rank predaceous vine. In hindsight, she was charting a route. I haven't seen her since. But on clear nights, I train my telescope beyond the joists and make her out. Ropeless, shivering, a speck. At such a reckless height, it wrings my guts. Free soloing the sheer face of our loss, without a carabiner for the crooks. And squinting through the hail of scree, I glimpse a figure arching back to say goodbye, then racking herself once more to span the fracture, her crimson fingers jammed in the crevasse, a shape diminishing in clouds of chalk. So not all my poems are that heavy, but if you've got a 9-year book, those sorts of poems are going to exist. So I hope you don't mind me reading those, but they are from the sort of second half of the book. What I'd like to do now, very briefly, is I want to read a poem and share the screen with you, just to because there's for a particular reason. This will be my last poem on a sort of with an elegiac note like this. For those of you who read my earlier books or who know me well, you'll know that my family, we lost our mother when she was 42, and some of my earlier books are right on this. Now, the reason I'm showing you this poem on the screen is because it's from the second section in the book called Biometrics, in which I use anagram. They're written in an invented form, as it were, and I use anagrams in place of end rhymes. And this is one of the briefest of those poems where the anagrams are actually made obvious. I've made them obvious off onto the right-hand side there. And this poem is unique among those because it's the only one where I use one anagram. I use anagrams, 19 lines, but all anagrams of one word, handwriting. And it's about encountering the handwriting of someone who's long gone. The late handwriting, her late hand. Like some death trap whose wiring hadn't been earthed, the live house of her handwriting remains unsafe. Here is mosquito din, gnat whir and midge language, transcribed and writhing. And there is where her hard tin wing nicked a smidgen from the moon's thawing rind. Look, a whisper, here is the nth drawing I made of a wounded heart winding. There must be better ways to draw night in, but this is mine. Take a holograph and ring it, hand over hand, then drape it, still damp, hand over hand, twining hard, then drape it, still damp over the thin wan grid of an insect zapper. Maybe it's a Darwin thing, an extinction's but a glut of inward night, a crow with comic timing in a ward, hinting that only those with the right DNA win. Reserve your bitter myrrh, giant wind. Give us one last nocturne on the baby grand within her heaving writing hand. Cheers to Mum. Okay, so not all my poems are like that. The first, I thought it'd be strange if I didn't read you a couple of poems set in London or set over where I'm living now. So I'll read a few poems from the first part of the book, which contains 29 or 33, depending on how you look at the numbered poems, sort of small little poems. They're like hors d'oeuvres. They're sonnet variations, really, although I'm taking a lot of liberties in some places with that form, and it's sometimes barely recognizable, I'd suggest. But they're just like hors d'oeuvres or antipasti, perhaps, or something like that, tapas or something like that, little poems to dig into. So I'll just read a few of these. Decide which one to start with. Okay, I'm going to move this. Just bear with me. I did not mean to have that up. The Monster of Whitechapel. As you may have heard, London is assailed periodically this century by these fatbergs that sort of appear in the sewage system, in the waterways under the cities, which are agglomerations of waste, human waste, basically, of all different kinds. The Monster of Whitechapel. Then word spread of the stinking blue whale-sized cost of our carry-on. 2 Wembley pitchers of rock-hard clot, some Godzilla globule tipping a dozen double-deckers on the scales, pulsing beneath our toes. Wet wipes and muscle gain supplements, nappies and topical creams for acne, condoms, hair gel, paracetamol, cotton buds, cocaine and cooking oil. We kept calm and carried on, clutching our professionalism as the sun went nosing the ragged grey lung above the gherkin like a pulmonary embolism. Here's my Brexit poem, really. Unicorned. Our dinosaur balloon has lost its pep. For weeks it commandeered the living room. It swayed above its empire like an airship, puffing out its hull of aluminium, taut as a kettle drum. Its bouncy arm insisted that we recognize its thainship and grant its natural right to Lebensraum, the old gods we were no longer to worship. But now it slumps behind the laundry rack for a patch and a pint of helium. It's far too late for us to take it back, and the co-op refuses to mend him. The vote's already in for this month's pick, a unicorn declared by referendum. I'll read 2 more and then I'll take some requests. I'll read 1 more, I think. I'll just read the title poem, Change Machine, which is one of these little squibs again. Change Machine, Waterloo Station. London, the sky sits on your face like the distressed arse of a XXL pair of stone-washed overalls. Charity lags in the polls. No one escapes the advertising blitz. London, you've done something terrible to my patience. E.g., to take a leak, I have to break a note, and this gives me the shits. I'm broke, and everything should be contactless. We breathlessly await the new vaccine, but no one disinfects the change machine. The turnstile clicks like a bottle-nosed dolphin at a killer whale. Go on, get in. Okay, so what I might do now, I hope you enjoyed those, but again, sometimes we make strange choices of what to read as authors, so I'm going to ask anybody who would like to request that I read a poem, type it into the chat if you like, and oh, I can see a couple there already. There, okay. Oh, but what I might do is throw to Lisa first and ask Lisa to make a request if you would like, Lisa, if you can put your, Lisa, thank you again so much for your remarkable readings of this book, working with me through over many months on this. Thank you.
It was a complete pleasure, Jaya, and an education for me, truly. I can't decide quite. I want you to decide between two very different ones. Whatever the question, the cordless, or the convict lying low near Hampton Court speaks. Which do you feel?
Okay. Good question. Maybe I'll read, let's see if there's anybody. The convict lying low, I feel like needs some explanation, but yeah, I'll read the convict because I know that you like that one, so I'll do it. And this is one of the anagram poems as well. Perhaps I can share the screen again here. This is the one just before. I've disguised this because the water mint anagram doesn't appear till much later. Okay, look, the convict lying low by Hampton Court speaks. Magwitch from The End of Great Expectations, the Dickens novel, makes an appearance here, so just to flag that. Also, Boris Johnson's word spaffed makes an appearance here. He famously used this word in a shockingly inappropriate context, and you can look that up if you like. Hampton Court is out in Bushy Park, which is not far from where I live. And Bushy Park is the second largest royal park of London. So there's deer floating about and stuff. Okay. The convict lying low by Hampton Court speaks. Home is the hoof-crushed water mint, the hard rushes, and an adamant stone chat declaring mid-morning's parliament again in session. I wear stag scent, oath hosed into the osier in ample train, chains of white gold water like enwrapped mail, warm links a-glitter in the pearl matin. Understand, I was cold, so stole fire. Telling you this is my one honest act. Sometimes I squat on the palace roof, tireless, listening to the wind riffling the loose strife for the vetted remains of travestied men, the secret of the Isle's fetor. 3. What heron consecrates a moist towelette upon the avenue to Arethusa, then drags its fretsome wet stiletto across the scum, pinpointing the auras of tadpoles, their ripples of inept alarm. The bowl of sky is spaffed with meso jot, thin cottony streaks of high wood yews, each abashedly declaring, I am written. Since Bushy Park rolled up its winter mat, this could be an aftershave advertisement, and I, the magwitch come wordwoes, barefoot in the bed straw, fixing mojitos. It's a very strange poem, that one. Thanks, Lisa. I might read the other one again. I might read the other one if I have a chance, but I'll stop the share here. Okay, I've got some, okay, I have some requests here. Magnifera, staggerly and hard water. Okay, so I'm keeping my eye on the time up there. And Toby's asked for one of the repeater poems. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for writing in. That's so kind of you. Okay, I'll read Magnifera. It's in the same slightly strange voice due to the anagrammatic form, and because for these because these are the anagram poems, so you get something from seeing it as well. So I might add this. Yeah, this is for all of us who grew up with mangoes. Magnifera. Ripeness was a semitone below the bone clef of the elbow, keying the rain-slicked cyclone fence, the firm sack-like rind of a warped minim, golden droop note for which we longed. Stone fruit are fine tutors. This one unseals a sensual nose hit. At dusk they go lambent like chunks of bent gloam. Sucked, their fibrous pith is birth-proof punk oblong pits belonging in a goblin's pot, infused with rich static and the fresh electric scratchity of summer lightning. Its fortune gave us this softer unit, surely. Edgewise, the frangipani made a rain gap fin for heads rife with fire in the shade of the mango belt. Okay, I'll take some more of these. Yeah, sometimes there I've got anagrams within the line. I mean, I don't want to be too dorky and kind of talk too much about the form. Yeah, they just occur to you as you go. And okay. So if I go back to stopping this, I'll go back to these. Okay, so I'll read. I've got a few requests for hard water. This is a tough poem. And it might be tough for family members to hear. The I in this poem is very much based on myself. However, it's not strictly myself, yeah, in this way where names and characters that appear in this poem sort of are, again, composites in a way from all sorts of places. Okay, so yeah, I'm not going to get away without reading this poem. It's kind of longish, and it's in a slightly more accessible register than some of those other poems, I suppose. And there are a fair few poems in this type of register. Hard water. The word we used was mellowed, and maybe he really had towards the end. But Victor took the jug cord to the boys for years. For half a life he whirred like a rowing machine. Barb said she heard the grunts of effort between the strokes from her yard across the creek, and that her bloke, Steady Brad, as he was known before the brain bleed, once wondered why that effing forklift driver couldn't just unload, until he clocked the ruckus was coming from inside the mullet stinking, guano spattered weatherboard, 2 or 3 abandoned Holdens further up the no-through road. Noosa Shane, the only Shane I know who's still loaded, was skiing at Banksia Beach when the semi-muffled thuds that echoed off the gazebo and along the promenade spooked him, and he flooded his flashy Suzuki 4-stroke outboard. Then there's Carol, who sometimes sleeps in the hide in the wetlands. She reckons some native bird responded to the hurt in the wind by clattering its own head about the mud. But Carol's also had it hard. Chook, Buddha, Wayne, Stink and Rod rarely conferred, and even when they did, they talked around it. Rod sailed closest when he recalled Vic's trawler in dry dock at Spinnaker Sound that night, a big fist of south, upward of 60 knots, shunted at leeward, free from its chucks, and they found the boat tilted on its port side in its cradle, with its outriggers totaled. All agreed the eldest bore the brunt. Kind kid, Jason. Before he could speak, he ferried turtle hatchlings on a raft of cast-off chipboard, bridging his back against a frigate bird. But the knock-off crowd at Bluey's 12 years later barely blinked up from their schooners when Vic cranked up What a Wonderful World on the jukebox and cracked his firstborn square in the jaw with the dartboard. Jace told me once that every time he flinched, his eyes would shut unwillingly, and a strange breed of angel would appear, who power lunged ahead in him, like a 9-ironed cane toad, strumming the harp of its innards. He chaired the rough proceedings. His instinct was to shield the younger two, so he hogged the conch for himself, refused to yield his time on the floor. It rarely worked. The second lad now lives in Chermside, is twice divorced, inseparable from his dogs Sinbad and Hector, and hardly ever wets the bed. The youngest I know well. He tried so hard to watch his fucking mouth, he went cross-eyed as he shivered in the shed. So Vic turned optometrist, measured the spite of each sharp clip across the void to reset the dials on the poor bastard. His thick glasses make him look a bit weird, but I'm proud of my stepdad, who I call Dad, who finally ended it, and who probably only ended his brief church speech when he shared all this with me later, long after he had belted me blue for the last time. I was reminded of it this weekend when I saw him reach behind the bread and casually plug the cord into the wall socket the way it was intended, while he bubbled up with pride about the Broncos, who had never finished dead last on the ladder, and the hard water roiled. Staggerly at Her Majesty's is a request there from a friend who's remained anonymous. I've got lots of anonymous messages coming to me privately, that is, and thank you for all of those. Fort Data, okay. Yes, okay, thank you. I'm just keeping an eye on time here. Thank you. Staggerly at Her Majesty's. There's a couple of poems in this book about bumping into big famous people. This was originally called Nick Cave at Buckingham Palace. I had the good fortune of having an invite to a reception at Buckingham Palace. Staggerly at Her Majesty's. This is non-fiction, by the way. By the sand crab Moose, a former editor of The Sun is topping up her flute of pink champagne. An aid worker vows to introduce her to Wolverine. Naturally, I fall in with the playwright and an oddly foppish yob from Toowoomba, fluent in several Ocker dialects, running an expat newspaper. Like salacious columnists, we're in bits, just witnessing the body sluice through a bank of tailored suits, still hot as lime juice on a torn cuticle, to blithely dismiss the crab Moose, 2 decades on from the all-out fluorescent assault of her work for Diet Coke in '88. Word wobbles round that Rolf has got the flu. Ahem. And poor Clive is properly crook. Some say he watches reruns of The Wire over and over. My patois is a heady mix of amnesia, empire, and capital. And just as I'm recalling this, the scene shifts to the portrait gallery, where the high priest of Duende, like some jet-haired Catalan entrepreneur straight out of Velasquez, widens the aperture. A brooding Gothic currawong among a froth of swans. Maybe 2 more. If I'm a cricket poem from Anthony Lawrence. I don't have a cricket poem. Sorry, that was privately. I don't have a cricket poem in this one. Okay, so I have one. I shouldn't mention people's names who've written to me in private. Sorry. So what I'll do is I will read a couple of more fun ones, because maybe I haven't chosen quite so many fun ones. And what I'll do is I'll read Fort Dada, but I might just show you this as well, because it's one of these sorts of poems that help from that help where it helps if you see it. Because I've been requested this in the companion poem. If we have time, maybe I'm running out of time for Q's and A's. I might have to make these the last 2. I feel like I should have read a couple of others, but okay. Fort Dada. So the form here, I'm using repeater words at the end of of each line. Once off the ship from sector blah blah, she checks into a spa in Baden-Baden, wet air spiced with a pile of old who's and warm custody wafts of ylang-ylang. Only the new filtration systems murmur, and 3 perfect smiles of pawpaw. Bowls heaped with wild mushroom couscous suit the one girl from Wagga Wagga, who knows her rendang from her gado gado. Bright and rare as a golden bulbul, she caught on quick, so flipped the frou-frou, went off piste. First Tai Chi, then the Cha-Cha. Love's dance, though, now that was lose-lose. They often wound up tangled in her yo-yo. The holiday in Crete, they fought like Cree-Cree, or way back in the early days in Woi Woi, when she went walkabout with the 22. Blood blurring loud above the never-never, visions surely no one else had had. Her naked papa brandishing his atlatl. Day-to-day distress remains hush-hush, and being seen wallowing is a boo-boo. So fuck you all, she says, and poo-poo to the pricks skeptical of my juju. Hence the spa, hence the list by Lang Lang. Autumn shook its crisping ochre pom-pom when, in the thermal mists of Baden-Baden, she winked back from her replica tuk-tuk at old sector blah blah and clinked chin-chin. There's a poem where I troll my own poem here called Below the Line, where I do the same thing. Maybe I should read that for fun again. because it was requested. And I can totally see I'm running out of time, so I need to answer questions. So maybe I'll just read this one. I had no plans for reading this one, but I'll just read it. And then maybe I'll throw to back to Emma for questions. Okay, once off the ship from sector blah blah below the line. Once off the ship from sector blah blah, snip snip. Person from Poolock Road at 23:55. Yeah. What started out so quickly became the same old. Really, I'm just going to try and find it here. Sorry. Really just another there number, parading the ghost of his mama, nostalgic for the promise of Expo 88, longing for the turquoise lagoons of Bora Bora where, flash as sailfish, headstrong as mahi-mahi, muscular as leaping marlin eye, yada yada. You know, the usual. Can't say I took it in toto. What I did read reminded me of the Berber I bunked with in Whoop Whoop during my gap years, the faintly musical donk-donk of the goat bells. Sure, it was funny, but not ha-ha funny. More funny sad, like the elegy for Ford in William Williams's The Wedge, 44, or the porcelain sunflower seeds of Ai Weiwei. In a dream, we're on stage at Hey On Why, I play the spectral glide, the wah-wah rhythm to his laser beam, pew-pew. Something's up with this game's AI, I mutters, hurling his console. I cry, dodging. Watch it, you big dodo. Pedantry's a gateway drug. Ask John Lili, shouts a heckler in Is It Gubby Gubby? And I would have asked him too, but what? But Lili was at the putt-putt, practicing his trick shots with Boutros Ghali, Lady Gaga, Gigi, and one of the Durans from Duran Duran. I know. There were no actual Durans in Duran Duran. But what work doesn't leak? Like the slide drip against the party leader at a bunga, art is deep background, a rumoured 50-50 fuck between knack and technique, the glug of Bob Hawke with a yard glass, and the inevitable tsk. Admin wrote at midnight. Stop thief, what's the big idea? That's my tutu. Okay, so I kind of did the reverse order to what the poet Alan Wern once taught me, which was make them laugh and then make them cry if possible. But I don't know if I made you laugh and I don't know if I made you cry, but I would have done it in reverse order if I did. Thank you everybody for coming. I might now take questions. If anybody wants to ask them or if you want to moderate a question, please send them in. And I'm sorry I've left it so late for questions. I just kept reading, but thank you all for those of you who stuck around.
That's okay. Thank you so much, Jaya. That was wonderful. I'm sure that everybody appreciated you reading more of your work. I definitely had a few messages coming in here with even more requests. So I think that everybody could listen to you read for many more hours. I've got a couple of questions come in, so I think that'll be perfectly timed actually. So the first is from Kath, who says, I'm also an Aussie poet in London. Someone's just come in and wrote that down. What is the impact of the new environment landscape on your writing?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question to answer succinctly. Like any organism that's transplanted into another place, I've been dipped in the UK, you might say, and I think that that's possibly obvious in the work. It's difficult to put my finger on it because it's still me in there, I think, but I suppose being immersed where different poetic cultures are more prominent. When I was younger, I never even planned on coming here. I thought if I'd go anywhere, I'd go to the States. And as these poems, I think you could tell probably aren't mostly influenced by by poetry discussions in the States. I'm not sure, but yeah, the impact it's very difficult to qualify. Anything that I say, I think would reflect as much on the fact that I'm just older. I'm just an older person. I mean, 9 years. A lot of life happens in that time. Maybe. I mean, the only way so I'd stopped writing for a long time. I mean, and it was partly the effect of being here and not feeling like a poet here. The whole sort of coming from Bribey and then speaking to friends and family and fellow poets in Australia is one thing, but then then coming to the UK, and especially first to Cambridge, which is its own unique microcosm within the British poetry culture kind of thing, and then leaving and then going to London, all of those things has had an effect. But to qualify that exactly, it's very hard to say. There might be, you're reminded of, aren't you, Kath? You're reminded of your Australianness every single day and exchange in a way. And so I think it might be that to some extent I've always been a bit chippy in a colonial way, and I actually didn't read many of those colonial poems actually. Like kind of poems, and so you could have those to enjoy. I kind of went confessional and personal in a way, and maybe that mischaracterizes the book to some extent, but there's a kind of I think that, let me put it this way, I think that the dominant discourse is in English poetry is obviously the transatlantic one between the UK and the USA, but what Australian kind of does there as a third voice that's not part of that is it can provide a critical energy. It can provide an interesting critical energy, and we have our irreverence, of course. So I'm doing a lot of things that I not supposed to do and I'm not allowed to do, you know, and all of that sort of thing. So I think maybe the critical edge, the critical aspect in my voice and in my work might have taken on some of that effect. That's how I'd answer that question. I hope that answers it to some extent, but I might take another question, Emma, if there is one, or have I read this?
Yeah, so a couple of people have asked, and this is a great one to conclude on actually, if you could tell everybody a bit about your writing and editing process.
Yeah, so there's a lot of, you might have gathered, there's some very different kinds of poems in here. And I guess I went through different phases. So you'll hear some metrical poems. The poem Bark to the Fuchsia is, it started out as metrical and it is still metrical, but it doesn't break the lines at the expected place, for instance. So I will go through a phase of for instance, writing in meter, which I probably would never have done if I weren't here. Although I love, you know, Five Bells, and I love, you know, the iambic lines of many great poets all the time. But, you know, I never thought I would have done that. So for instance, in that case, I went through that phase. In another phase, when I was in Paris on an Australia Council writing residency, I kind of, you know, so I kind of got obsessed on that on the biometrics form, the anagram form. So I kind of have these little moments of obsessiveness if I find a thing that interests me, an approach, a kind of a way in, almost like a formal approach that allows, because that frees me up in a way that allows me to just I don't know, just it frees me up in some ways. So perhaps that's what I'd say about my writing process. Whole years went by where I didn't write poems, and then but I did keep notes, you know, jottings, and they did come in handy in the later years when I did for some reason have the time and also find the space and have the mental space to write poems. So I do work from that. The editing process, yeah, I mean, there must be one or two lines here floated around for 10 years before they found their way in a poem. It's just the way that it goes, isn't it? Like, you know, I often joke with my students. I mean, in fact, teaching and pedagogy has probably played an unacknowledged role to some extent in my work as well. You know, when you're having to explain things to students, you take them on board even more so yourself, perhaps. Yeah, so the process, that's how I'd answer that in a short space of time. I can see some people are having to go because it's hitting the hour. So thank you to all of those who have to leave now. We might, I think we have to end on that because it is hitting the time, and I don't want to ask avid readers to go on over the time. But if I'll just say my thanks to everybody for tuning in, and I hope that you're all keeping safe and staying well. Sorry, I've got these new cameras from work that are put up here and I get confused. I hope that you're all staying safe. I wish that I could be there and clink a glass with you, but although we couldn't do that anyway, and each and every one of you, you know, I can't do the cliched thing about challenging times. We were written about that, but thank you all. Thank you again to UQP, Aviva, Lisa, and my readers, and everybody who's acknowledged in my book, and also to Avid Reader. So thank you, Emma.
Thank you so much, Jaya, and thank you also to everybody for joining us again this evening, as Jaya says, and thank you to Lisa, Aviva, and Sally Wilson also for helping organise and run this fantastic event. As you said, it would be, I'm having lots of comments coming in and thank yous from audience members here saying how much they've enjoyed this evening. So I think now I'll take everybody off mute. I'm going to ask you all to unmute yourselves and join me in thanking Jaya for a wonderful event tonight. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you for all those private comments in the chat.
Have a lovely evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Jaya.
Cheers. Thank you.